In the annals of early American history, few tales curdle the blood like that of the Sullivans of 1834. In the quiet lanes of upstate New York, where farmland stretched in uneasy silence and oil lamps flickered against log walls, neighbors whispered that the devil himself had taken a wife. For this couple, Patrick and Mary Sullivan were not merely unhappy in their union. They were, according to those who lived near them, the very image of destruction chained together. Their names became synonymous with fear, their home a shadowed landmark of screams and smoke. Imagine a marriage that was less a bond of affection and more a pact written in ashes. Patrick, an Irish immigrant with a laborer's back and a drunkard's temper, and Mary, a local girl marked by sudden rages and strange visions, together created a household where fear, not love, ruled. The year was 1834, but the violence within their home might as well have belonged to a darker age. According to official records, the couple was fined, warned, and brought before magistrates more than once. But no punishment ever changed them. Their violence only grew. Neighbors recalled screams that split the night air, the sound of breaking glass carried across fields, and children seen wandering half-dressed in the snow. Some said they glimpsed Mary with wild eyes, muttering prayers backward. Others swore Patrick carried bruises that looked less like the marks of a fight and more like burns, as though touched by fire no hearth produced. No single account could capture the horror, but all agreed this was no ordinary couple. In communities of the 1830s, reputation meant survival. To be branded dangerous was to risk exile from the only network of support that kept a family alive. And yet, despite their notoriety, the Sullivans endured. Perhaps it was pity or fear or the stubborn hope that the violence might someday subside. But the whispers persisted, passed from porch to pew. Something was festering inside that household, something that would one day erupt. The eruption came on a night when the world outside was cold and the lamps inside burned low. Flames, visible from the road, devoured the Sullivan farmhouse. Neighbors rushed to the scene, only to witness a tableau of horror. Mary outside screaming words no one understood, Patrick half-burned and cursing her name, and children trapped within. According to official records, 2 children perished that night. A third was never found. Whether consumed by fire or lost to some other fate, no one could ever say. And in that uncertainty lay the birth of legend. But before the fire, there were years of warning signs, years in which cruelty and madness walked hand in hand. This is where the story begins, not with the blaze itself, but with the unholy union that lit it. America has known many dark families, but few so deserving of the title America's Worst Couple. The tragedy of Patrick and Mary Sullivan is not only a tale of personal ruin. It is a mirror held to the shadows of a nation still young, a reminder that even in its infancy, the United States harbored horrors no scripture or science could cleanse. Some believe the truth was buried in the ashes. Others believe the fire never went out. Either way, the Sullivan family tragedy remains a story that defies logic, a wound carved into the memory of 1834 that still bleeds into ours. The Sullivans of 1830s America. The 1830s in America were years of contradiction, young nation swelling with pride, yet haunted by poverty, superstition, and unrest. In the rolling countryside of upstate New York, life was harsh but familiar. Families worked the soil, prayed in modest churches, and clung to community ties to endure the uncertainties of weather and economy. It was also a world where whispers traveled faster than facts, and where a family's reputation could either uphold or undo them. Into this fragile fabric stepped Patrick and Mary Sullivan, whose marriage would become infamous long after the embers of their home had cooled. Patrick Sullivan had come from Ireland, like many who fled hunger and bleak prospects. Ship logs place him among those who landed in New York in the late 1820s. Descriptions in local papers refer to him as tall, broad-shouldered, and quick to fight. He took work where he cooed farmhand, canal digger, timber labor, yet his earnings often drained into taverns. Neighbors described him as a man whose laughter could turn to rage in an instant, especially when whiskey stained his breath. According to official records, Patrick stood before a magistrate at least twice for drunken, disorderly conduct, each time fined but quickly back to his habits. Mary Sullivan, born Mary Whitlock, was a daughter of the region. She grew up in a God-fearing household, her father a farmer, her mother remembered as stern but kindly. Yet those who knew her as a girl whispered that she carried a storm inside her. Her temper was sudden, her moods unpredictable. Some claimed she saw visions, speaking of shadows in the fields or voices at the window. Such talk was dismissed as fancies of youth until it hardened into the eccentricities of an adult woman. When she married Patrick around 1831, neighbors hoped marriage might steady her. It did not. Their union was fire meeting tinder. Patrick's violence and Mary's volatility struck sparks that rarely went unnoticed. Records in the county clerk's office mentioned their names not only for marriage, but for complaints, property damage, unpaid debts, and domestic disturbances. A single line in one ledger reads, "Sullivan household, repeated noise and disorder warned by constable." No elaboration follows, but locals did not need it. The Sullivans' arguments could be heard from the road, and children in nearby houses lay awake counting the crashes and shouts until dawn. Life in 1830s America carried enough hardship without such turmoil. Crops failed, banks faltered, and families clung to one another for survival. Yet within the Sullivan cabin, survival was less about enduring the elements and more about enduring each other. Mary was seen with bruises she explained away, while Patrick often bore scratches down his arms. One neighbor recounted that Mary once threw a pot of boiling water across the room, narrowly missing him. Another recalled seeing Patrick drag her by the hair through the yard. According to official records, no charges were pursued. Domestic disputes were often hidden behind walls, tolerated until tragedy forced them into daylight. And yet, even amid this violence, they were bound together. Some said it was poverty that kept them yoked. Others said fear. Still others whispered of a darker bond neither could escape. Whatever the truth, by 1833 the Sullivans had carved a place for themselves in the county's laurea, a couple at once ordinary in their poverty and extraordinary in their destructiveness. Neighbors began calling them the cursed pair, a phrase that clung even before the fire that would seal their infamy. To speak of Patrick and Mary was to speak of a storm gathering in silence, waiting for the night it would finally break. Seeds of violence. The earliest years of the Sullivan marriage were marked not by the gentle rhythms of domestic life, but by a steady drumbeat of violence. What began as raised voices soon became slammed doors, shattered crockery, and the sound of fists against wooden flesh. Neighbors recalled walking past the cabin and hearing Mary's shrieks cut through the night, followed by Patrick's booming curses. In the 1830s, when family matters were rarely aired before courts, such disturbances were tolerated as private business. But the Sullivans' home was no ordinary quarrelsome household. It was a theater of cruelty. According to official records, Patrick was fined in 1832 for brawling in a tavern, but locals insisted the fight began over his treatment of Mary. One witness claimed Patrick boasted that he could break her spirit like a colt. Mary, however, was no passive victim. Accounts describe her retaliating in ways both furious and strange. She reportedly slashed Patrick's coat with a knife during one argument, and on another occasion, neighbors swore they saw smoke curling from beneath the cabin door after she shouted that he would learn fire's lesson. When Patrick emerged, his shirt was scorched at the hem. Whether by accident or design, no one could prove. Objects in the Sullivan home often bore the scars of these battles. A table split by an axe, windows cracked not by weather, but by thrown objects, Children's toys were found charred in the yard, as though tossed into flames in anger. One visiting cousin recalled that Mary, eyes wild, warned her never to trust the walls of the house, because they listen and they tell. Such phrases unsettled even hardened men, and some began whispering that Mary's rages were less human than otherworldly. The children themselves became unwilling witnesses. A neighbor recounted hearing a boy cry, only to see him later with a welt across his cheek and Patrick drunk on the porch. Another neighbor claimed she once saw Mary grip her daughter's arm so tightly that the child could not move it for days. Yet the truth of these accounts blurred in the fog of rumor. According to official records, no charges of abuse were filed, and the family continued much as before, their violence an open secret hidden in plain sight. Superstition gave the stories darker edges. Some neighbors claimed the family's cow went dry after one of Mary's outbursts, and that chickens refused to roost near the Sullivan yard. A farmer swore that when Patrick struck Mary one evening, lightning split a tree not 50 yards from the cabin. Coincidence, perhaps, but in a community already wary of omens, each incident wove tighter the narrative that something unnatural lay within that marriage. The seeds of violence grew with every passing year. Arguments that might elsewhere have ended in silence seemed only to feed the Sullivans' fury. Some believed they needed each other's rage, that anger was the only tether binding them. Others said fear kept them from parting. Fear of poverty, fear of scandal, or fear of what one might do to the other if left alone. According to official records, Patrick and Mary remained together without legal separation or complaint. Yet in the eyes of their neighbors, theirs was not a marriage, but a slow-burning fuse, one that promised, sooner or later, to reach its fire. Children in the shadows. Among the deepest tragedies of the Sullivan household were not the clashes between Patrick and Mary themselves, but the shadows these battles cast over their children. In the early 1830s, the couple had 3 children, 2 boys, and a girl, though records differ on their names and exact ages. School registers list a James Sullivan enrolled briefly in 1832, while a baptismal entry in a local parish records a Margaret Sullivan in 1830. The county census of 1,833 notes only 3 minors. From the beginning, their lives were blurred by contradiction, as though even the ink on the page could not bear to hold their story steady. Neighbors remembered the children less as playmates and more as fleeting figures glimpsed at the edges of fields or peering through cracked shutters. They were often absent from school, their attendance patchy at best. One teacher recalled that when they did appear, they sat in silence, answering questions with curt nods, as if wary of speaking aloud. Rumors spread that they carried bruises, though no proof was ever offered. According to official records, no complaints of abuse were filed, but those who saw the children whispered otherwise. A chilling memory survives in the words of a farmer's wife who lived nearby. One winter morning, she found the eldest boy wandering barefoot in snow, his lips blue, muttering about the fire mother makes. When she wrapped him in a blanket and carried him home, Patrick came storming to the door within the hour, dragging the boy back without thanks. That evening, smoke rose from the chimney and shouts echoed across the fields. "We prayed for those children," the farmer's wife later told her grandson. But prayer never reached that house. Their daughter, Margaret, or perhaps Mary Jr., as some records suggest, was remembered as silent but watchful. One neighbor swore the girl appeared at her window late at night, pale-faced and motionless, before vanishing into the dark. Others said she clutched a doll with burnt cloth for a dress, carrying it everywhere like a talisman. The younger son was spoken of only in fragments, a shadow who followed his siblings but never spoke. In later retellings, some even claimed there were only 2 children, not 3, and that memory itself had split them like faulty glass. Life inside the Sullivan home left few traces beyond rumor. A visitor once reported seeing all three children locked inside, while Mary argued with Patrick outside, their small fists banging on the windows. Another swore that when he entered the cabin on an errand, he found one child curled under the table, eyes wide with fear, while Mary muttered psalms in a harsh, broken voice. According to official records, these were matters of hearsay, not fact, but the consistency of such stories cannot be dismissed. Some in the community claimed the children carried omens. A blacksmith said his horse refused to pass the Sullivan house if the children were outside, pulling against the reins until the road was cleared. A preacher remarked that the youngest boy never blinked during service, staring at him with such intensity that he stumbled over his sermon. Whether exaggeration or truth, such accounts painted the children as figures already marked by the strangeness of their household. Innocence should have been there, right? But in the Sullivan home, it was stripped away. They were raised in a crucible of rage, their every day a test of endurance. And as the years passed, the children seemed to fade further into rumor, becoming less flesh and blood and more ghostly echoes. According to official records, 3 minors lived in that household. Yet in the memories of those who watched from a distance, the Sullivan children were already shadows long before the fire reduced their home to ash. The winter of 1833. The winter of 1833 pressed hard upon Clay County and its scattered farms. Snow came early, layering the fields in white silence, and the wind carried an edge that cut through coats and cabins alike. For most families, it was a season of huddling close, of mending clothes by firelight and rationing what little remained of the harvest. But in the Sullivan household, the cold brought with it not only hardship, but a growing madness that neighbors would later call the final omen before tragedy struck. Patrick had grown restless. His labor scarce as canal projects slowed and farms offered little work in frozen ground. Without steady wages, he turned increasingly to drink. The tavern keeper on Main Street recalled that Patrick became a fixture at the counter, often too drunk to walk home, cursing his wife and pounding his fist until someone guided him out. According to official records, he was fined again that December for disorderly conduct. Yet punishment meant little. His rages only deepened, fueled by whiskey and humiliation. Mary, meanwhile, seemed to unravel in stranger ways. Her moods shifted with the weather, her eyes haunted, her words often tangled in scripture and visions. A cousin who visited before Christmas claimed Mary spoke of demons scratching at the windows and a voice in the snow that calls my name. She filled pages of a diary with frantic handwriting snatches of psalms, drawings of flames, and repeated phrases. They must be cleansed and fire will tell the truth. Those fragments, later recovered from the ruins, remain among the most disturbing artifacts of the case. Neighbors began reporting strange occurrences at the Sullivan farm. Livestock was found dead in the barn, 2 sheep with their throats torn, a pig stiff and cold though no illness was known. A farmhand passing by swore he heard chanting from the cabin, words he could not recognize, carried on the wind. A child in the next house claimed she saw a light flickering inside when the lamps had long gone dark. According to official records, no investigations were conducted. Lawmen dismissed such accounts as superstition. But in a county steeped in folklore, the stories spread quickly, binding the Sullivans' reputation tighter to fear. Inside the cabin, tensions mounted. Patrick, drunk and desperate, accused Mary of witchcraft, shouting that she had cursed his work and soured their luck. Mary retorted that Patrick was already damned, his soul blackened by drink. Witnesses later testified that the couple's arguments grew louder, more violent, until even the children's cries could not drown them out. A neighbor swore he saw Mary strike a match and hold it to Patrick's sleeve while screaming, "You will burn for this." Though the flame was snuffed before it spread, the image lingered in memory as a dreadful foreshadowing. As the snow deepened, so too did the sense of foreboding. Church attendance dwindled for the family. They sat in the back pew, eyes downcast, ignored by those around them. A deacon's wife later recalled that Mary muttered through the hymns, her voice low and dissonant, until her own children shushed her. Patrick, by contrast, often stormed out before the sermon ended, leaving his family to trail behind in humiliation. According to official records, their names remained on the church rolls, but their presence was more curse than comfort. The winter of 1833 became remembered not only for its cold, but for the gathering darkness around the Sullivans. Every fight, every whispered story, every flicker of light in the cabin's windows became part of a narrative the community could not ignore. It was as if the year itself was holding its breath, one elder would later say. For in that season of frost and famine, the seeds of fire were already waiting to ignite, and the shadows over the Sullivan family grew too thick for daylight to pierce. The night of March 1834. On the night of March 14th, 1834, the Sullivan tragedy reached its terrible climax. The wind was high, carrying the last breath of winter across the fields, and the moon hung low in a sky veiled by thin clouds. It was close to midnight when neighbors first noticed the glow of a dull orange flicker against the black horizon. Within minutes, flames licked the roof of the Sullivan farmhouse, sparks spiraling into the night. By the time cries rang out, the fire had already claimed the house. According to official records, the alarm was raised by a farmer named Nathaniel Briggs, who spotted the flames from his barn. He roused his household and rushed toward the blaze. Others followed, stumbling through snow and mud with buckets and blankets. What they found was not a home to be saved, but a vision of chaos. The cabin roared like a furnace, timbers shrieking as they split and collapsed. Mary Sullivan stood outside, hair wild, dress torn, screaming words that few could understand. Witnesses swore she cried, "They must burn. The fire will tell." Her hands were blistered, yet she made no move to douse the flames. Patrick Sullivan emerged moments later, his clothes alight, skin blackened at the edges. He collapsed into the snow, rolling desperately to smother the fire clinging to him. His voice, hoarse and furious, cut through the crackle of wood. "She did it. She lit it." Those who heard would never forget the raw terror in his tone. Neighbors dragged him away from the blaze, though his skin peeled beneath their grip. Even as he was carried to safety, Patrick cursed Mary's name, insisting she had locked the children inside. But the true horror lay within. The Sullivan children, trapped by either design or disaster, were still inside the burning house. Neighbors tried to force their way in, but the doors were already engulfed and the roof sagging dangerously. The screams of the children, high and thin, echoed above the roar until at last they ceased. When the flames subsided hours later, the remains of two small bodies were found amid the ashes. A third child was missing, never to be recovered. Whether consumed entirely by the fire or spirited away in some darker fate, no one could say. That uncertainty became the heart of the mystery. Eyewitness accounts conflict sharply. Some swore they saw Mary holding a lantern just before the blaze began. Others insisted Patrick stumbled home drunk with a candle, knocking it into a pile of rags. According to official records, both stories appeared in testimony, their contradictions unresolved. What is certain is that the fire spread too swiftly, too fiercely, for any ordinary accident. A local blacksmith declared, "It was like the house wanted to burn, like it had been waiting for the spark." Mary herself seemed unmoored as the fire devoured her home. Witnesses described her as laughing and weeping in turns, raising her arms toward the flames as though in prayer. One woman swore she heard Mary whisper, "Now they are safe," even as the screams of her children rang out. Patrick, by contrast, clung to life in agony, muttering over and over, "She locked them in. She locked them in." By dawn, nothing remained of the Sullivan home but blackened beams and a pit of smoldering ash. The smoke carried a stench that lingered for days, seeping into the clothes and hair of all who came near. According to official records, the coroner listed the cause of death for 2 minors as perished by fire, origin uncertain. The missing child was recorded simply as unaccounted. No explanation satisfied the townsfolk, who stood at the ruins in silence, each face etched with fear and disbelief. The night of March 1834 ended with a household reduced to ash and a community forever scarred. What sparked the fire remains lost in contradiction. What followed, however, would grip the county and later the nation with a tale of madness, violence, and mystery. For in the aftermath of the blaze, questions multiplied and answers grew ever more elusive. Conflicting testimonies. In the wake of the fire, as smoke still curled from the ruins of the Sullivan home, the town was gripped not by relief that the flames had finally died, but by questions that refused to be answered. Who had set the blaze that claimed 2 young lives and left a 3rd child missing? Was it Patrick, drunk and reckless? Or Mary, mad and merciless? The testimonies that emerged in the following days only deepened the mystery, dividing neighbors, friends, and even family into bitter camps. According to official records, the first sworn statement came from Patrick himself. Bandaged and burned, he told the magistrate from his sickbed that Mary had barred the doors and struck the flame. She locked them in, he repeated, voice hoarse with smoke and pain. She lit the lantern and said they must burn. His words carried the weight of a father's grief. Yet those who had known him long recognized the venom of a husband eager to see his wife condemned. Was it truth or vengeance spoken through cracked lips? Mary, arrested within hours of the fire, offered a tale no less damning. She insisted Patrick had returned drunk, a candle in his hand, muttering curses. According to her, he knocked the candle into a pile of rags and kindling, then staggered into bed without noticing the flames. I tried to save them, she cried during her first hearing, though witnesses recalled her words lacked tears. Some swore her voice carried no grief at all, only fury. To others, she appeared possessed, eyes blazing, hands clenched as though still holding the match. Witness accounts conflicted as wildly as the couple's accusations. A farmer swore he saw Mary with a lantern just before the blaze erupted. Another insisted Patrick stumbled into the yard with his clothes already aflame. The blacksmith's wife claimed she heard Mary shouting that the fire will tell the truth, while a deacon testified that Patrick cried out, "It'll burn you all," hours earlier in the tavern. According to official records, these contradictions left the magistrates in torment. There was no clear chain of evidence, only smoke and rumor. Even the physical evidence gave no answers. The ruins revealed no clear origin point, the flames having consumed every beam and board. The children's remains, fragile and incomplete, told only of their suffering, not its cause. The missing child, whether fled or burned beyond recognition, was a void no testimony could fill. Each absence of proof became its own accusation, twisted to suit the beliefs of the teller. The community itself split in judgment. Some declared Mary a witch, pointing to her diary fragments with drawings of flames and her muttered visions of demons. Others condemned Patrick, a man known for drink and violence, his history with the magistrates proof enough of guilt. Families who had once prayed together now argued in the pews. Taverns grew heated with debates. Even funerals became whispers of blame. The tragedy had not only destroyed a household, it had ignited the town itself. A courthouse hearing convened weeks later, its records later lost in a fire of their own in 1870. According to surviving newspaper accounts, the proceedings were chaotic. Witnesses contradicted one another. Mary screamed of conspiracies. Patrick, weak and scarred, cursed her name from the dock. The magistrate, weary and uncertain, postponed judgment. "Truth is buried in ash," he was quoted as saying. It was a phrase that lingered long after, repeated in sermons and gossip alike. What remains certain is that in the wake of the fire, truth itself seemed to vanish. Each testimony was a mirror turned against another, reflecting only confusion. The more the townsfolk sought clarity, the deeper the shadows grew. And in those shadows, the legend of the Sullivan family tragedy rooted itself not as a story of guilt proven, but of blame forever unresolved. The missing child. Of all the horrors that sprang from the Sullivan fire, none tormented the community more than the fate of the missing child. When the flames had cooled and the smoldering ruins were sifted, the bodies of 2 children were recovered, small, fragile remains that bore silent witness to the night's terror. But the 3rd child, whether son or daughter, was never found. This absence became the darkest mystery of all, a wound that no testimony, record, or prayer could heal. According to official records, the coroner listed the child simply as unaccounted. No trace of bone or ash sufficient for identification was discovered in the ruins. Some suggested that the fire had been so fierce it consumed every remnant. But experienced farmers scoffed no ordinary blaze could erase a body so completely. Others whispered that the child had fled into the night, escaping the flames only to vanish into wilderness or river. Either possibility was dreadful, and neither offered peace. Witnesses fanned the uncertainty with conflicting claims. A neighbor's daughter swore she saw a small figure running from the cabin just as the roof collapsed. A traveler passing through weeks later insisted he met a ragged boy by the riverbank who mumbled about the fire mother made. When he returned with others, the boy was gone, leaving only footprints in mud that led nowhere. According to surviving accounts, these stories were never confirmed, but they ignited the town's imagination like sparks carried by the wind. Rumors grew darker still. Some claimed Mary herself had taken the child away before the fire, concealing him with relatives or strangers as part of a sacrifice. Others accused Patrick of hiding the child in drunken shame, fearful of another mouth to feed. In the absence of proof, theories multiplied endlessly. The missing child became not only a victim of tragedy, but a symbol of everything unknowable in the Sullivan case. In later decades, the legend deepened. Folklore in the county spoke of the Sullivan boy who never died. Hunters in the woods claimed to hear a child's laughter where no child lived. Campfires sparked tales of a pale figure seen at dusk near the ruins, small hands clutching a burnt doll. Some swore that if you left bread at the foundation stones, it would vanish by morning, taken by unseen hands. According to official records, such stories are absent, but in the oral history of the town, they endure. The uncertainty gnawed at the surviving community. Funerals for the 2 children were solemn, but without the 3rd body, the grief felt unfinished, as though the coffin remained open in every mind. The preacher spoke of faith, declaring that God knew where the missing child had gone. But the silence in the pews was heavy with doubt. For the townsfolk, it was not divine mystery, but human cruelty that haunted them. The missing child became both ghost and question mark. Each retelling of the Sullivan tragedy turned upon that absence. Was the child consumed, concealed, or saved? No ledger, no testimony, no confession ever brought resolution. And so, long after the flames died, the mystery of the unfound child burned on in whispers in folklore, in the hollow silence where a name should have been. In the story of America's worst couple, it is this absence that most clearly shows how truth itself can vanish into smoke. The trial. The trial of Patrick and Mary Sullivan became one of the most contentious proceedings ever to unsettle the county courthouse. In the spring of 1834, with the ashes of their cabin still visible against the hillside, the couple was brought in chains to face accusations that would determine not only their fates, but the truther, at least a version of it had history, would remember. According to official records, the charges were grim: murder by arson, cruelty, and neglect. Yet beyond the legal words lay something darker. A community desperate to assign blame for a tragedy that defied explanation. From the outset, the atmosphere in the courtroom was tense. Crowds filled the gallery, farmers and merchants shoulder to shoulder, craning to see the notorious pair. Mothers clutched rosaries, children whispered about ghosts in the ruins, and old men muttered about omens. The judge, weary and stern, reminded all that this was a court of law, not a church of superstition. But the weight of rumor and fear pressed in nonetheless, shaping every testimony before a word was spoken. Patrick entered bandaged and scarred, his skin still raw from burns. His gait was unsteady, his voice hoarse, but his accusations against Mary were unrelenting. He painted himself as a victim, claiming he had stumbled home to find her lighting the lantern that doomed them all. Mary, pale and defiant, countered with her own story, that Patrick, drunk and raging, had dropped the candle in his stupor and left her to fight the flames. Theirs was less a defense and more a duel, each word a weapon, each testimony an attempt to bury the other. Witnesses were called, their memories as fractured as the ruins they described. The blacksmith swore he had seen Mary with fire in her eyes, chanting as the flames rose. The deacon claimed Patrick had threatened to burn his family hours earlier in the tavern. A farmer's wife testified to seeing both of them outside the cabin as the children screamed within. According to official records, the testimonies contradicted one another so sharply that the court descended into chaos. No single narrative held firm. Every truth was splintered by doubt. The surviving evidence was presented with solemnity. The charred remains of the children, Mary's diary fragments filled with drawings of flames, Patrick's bloodied coat. The prosecution argued that such items proved malice. The defense countered that they proved only poverty, drink, and despair. The jury, 12 men drawn from the county, sat in grim silence, their faces pale as each new horror unfolded. Mary's behavior in court unsettled many. She alternated between furious outbursts and eerie calm, once reciting psalms in a low monotone until the judge ordered her silenced. Patrick, though weakened, erupted in sudden fits of rage, shouting her name like a curse. Observers remarked that the trial seemed less a search for justice than a theater of madness, each spouse reflecting the other's darkness. Newspapers carried the story beyond the county, their headlines painting the Sullivans as the worst couple in America. Readers devoured the scandal, speculating in parlors and taverns hundreds of miles away. Yet despite the sensationalism, the truth remained elusive. According to official records, the court never established who struck the fatal spark. The only certainty was that 2 children lay dead, one was missing, and the survivors bore scars too deep for healing. In the end, the judge postponed final judgment, citing insufficient evidence. The trial ended not with clarity, but with confusion, leaving the Sullivans to await sentencing as prisoners while the community seethed with unresolved rage. Some called it justice deferred, others called it justice denied. What it truly was, perhaps, was a recognition that no verdict could ever mend what had been broken in the night of fire. Truth itself, like the missing child, remained absent from the courtroom, leaving only ash, whispers, and fear. The sentence. The trial ended without clarity, but the county could not endure silence forever. Pressure mounted on the magistrates to deliver a verdict, for the town demanded justicer, at least a name, to shoulder the blame. According to official records, judgment was rendered in midsummer of 1834, months after the blaze, when tempers had cooled enough for the court to reconvene. But the decision that emerged reflected less the certainty of law and more the desperation of a community haunted by unanswered questions. Patrick Sullivan, scarred and weakened, was sentenced to prison for manslaughter. The charge acknowledged that his drunkenness and violence had contributed to the deaths, yet stopped short of declaring him the fire's author. He was to serve 15 years of hard labor, though many believe his body would never endure the term. Patrick, upon hearing the sentence, spat blood onto the floor and cursed Mary's name, crying that she had lit the match and would burn in hell for it. Mary Sullivan's fate diverged. The court, swayed by her erratic behavior, the fragments of her diary, and testimony that spoke of her visions, declared her insane. She was not sentenced to death or prison, but to confinement in an asylum 2 counties away. Official documents describe her as unstable, possessed by delusions, and unfit for common society. To some, it was a merciful sentence. To others, it was a cowardly evasion allowing her to escape true punishment. The reaction in the community was divided. Families who had lost sleep to the sounds of the Sullivans' quarrels felt cheated by the verdict. Both should have hung, one farmer declared. Others believed Patrick deserved harsher judgment for his long record of violence and drink. And still others whispered that Mary had bewitched the court as she had her family, her madness shielding her from a noose. According to a newspaper account, the gallery erupted in shouts as the sentences were read, forcing the sheriff to strike his staff upon the floor for silence. The sentences themselves did little to quiet the larger mystery. Patrick and Mary had each condemned the other, and the court had found both guilty in different ways without ever proving who sparked the fire. The missing child remained absent from the record, an open wound no judgment could close. For all the official paperwork, the truth was still smoke in the wind. When the couple was led from the courthouse, the crowd parted in silence. Patrick, chains rattling, looked back only once, his face twisted in rage. Mary walked with a strange calm, lips moving in a whisper no one could hear. Some swore she smiled. One witness recalled that as the carriage door closed upon her, she murmured, "The fire will come again." Whether prophecy or madness, the words lingered long after the wheels had rolled away. Thus the town gained its verdict, but not its peace. According to official records, justice had been served. Yet for those who lived in the shadow of the Sullivan tragedy, justice remained as elusive as the missing child. The sentences were not an ending, but a continuation of passage that would lead to new horrors in prison cells and asylum halls, where the Sullivan name would echo still. Life in the asylum. Mary Sullivan's removal to the asylum marked a new and dreadful chapter in the tragedy. Carried away in a rattling carriage through country roads, she left behind not only the ruins of her home, but the whispers of a town that had already judged her. According to official records, she was committed to the Utica Asylum for the Insane in late 1834, a facility known as much for its severity as its care. There, among stone walls and barred windows, Mary's story darkened further. Life inside the asylum was harsh. Patients were confined to cold cells, their meals meager, their treatment a mixture of prayer, restraint, and crude medicine. Nurses' journals from that year describe a woman from Clay County, prone to fiery visions and psalm chanting, almost certainly Mary. She was reported to mutter through the night, her voice weaving scripture with incoherent pleas. One attendant wrote, "She speaks of children calling to her from the smoke. She says they're not dead, only waiting." Witnesses noted strange phenomena around her confinement. On more than one occasion, nurses claimed her cell glowed faintly, as though firelight danced upon its walls though no lamp was lit. A physician dismissed it as imagination. Yet another recorded, the air in her chamber was hot to the touch. Some believed she had carried the fire with her, not merely as memory, but as curse. Her behavior unsettled even hardened staff. She often refused food, insisting she must fast until the children return. At other times, she scratched words and symbols into the stone with her fingernails. Crude crosses, jagged flames, and the phrase, "They're safe in fire." According to official records, she was restrained frequently, though never entirely subdued. Her strength in moments of frenzy shocked those who witnessed it, as if some unseen force lent her power. The other patients feared her. Some swore they heard her prayers answered by whispers from the dark. A man housed in the adjoining cell refused to sleep, insisting that when Mary closed her eyes, smoke crept beneath his door. Another woman claimed she saw children's faces in the corners whenever Mary spoke aloud. Such stories spread among the inmates until staff forbade them to speak her name. According to official records, Mary's health declined steadily. She grew gaunt, her hair white before its time, her eyes hollow yet fever-bright. Physicians listed her cause of death in 1837 as consumption, a common fate in those grim halls. Yet the attendant's notes tell a different story. On the night she died, the fire bell in town rang without cause, and a nurse swore the sheets around her smoldered though no flame was found. She left as she lived, the nurse wrote, in fire. Thus ended Mary Sullivan's days, not in freedom or repentance, but in the confines of a stone cell where madness and legend intertwined. To the community, her death brought neither closure nor comfort. Some said her spirit lingered in the asylum halls, others that it returned to the ruins of her home. According to official records, she was buried in an unmarked grave. But for those who had feared her, the earth itself could not keep her fire contained. Patrick's fate. While Mary's days dwindled in the asylum, Patrick Sullivan's sentence carried him to the grim world of Auburn Prison, a fortress of stone and iron known for its brutal labor regime. According to official records, Patrick began his term in late 1834, scarred from burns and already weakened by drink. Inmates recalled him as a man whose rage had not been burned out by the fire, but sharpened by it. His voice, hoarse and cracked, could be heard cursing the guards, the walls, and above all, the name of his wife. Prison life was merciless. Convicts worked the quarries and workshops from dawn until dusk, their bodies broken under the lash of overseers. Patrick, though broad-shouldered, never recovered his strength after the blaze. He limped through the yard, his skin marred with scars that split in winter cold. Fellow inmates remembered him muttering to himself, repeating phrases like "she lit it" and "the fire in me." Some swore he woke screaming at midnight, clawing at his chest as though flames still burned there. The guards noted his violent temper. He lashed out during work, striking others with tools, earning solitary confinement more than once. Yet he also collapsed without warning, seized by fits of coughing blood. According to a physician's note, Patrick's lungs were damaged by smoke and spirits alike, his survival uncertain from start. Still, he endured, fueled by hatred as much as by will. Inmates spun their own tales around him. Some claimed he was haunted by visions of his children, that he spoke to shadows in the corners of his cell. Others whispered that when he struck the walls in anger, scorch marks appeared beneath his fists. Official records make no mention of such phenomena, but the rumors spread nonetheless, until Patrick became less a man than a specter among the living. After nearly a decade, Patrick was released, his sentence shortened for ill health. He emerged in the 1840s a ghost of himself, gaunt and staggering, his eyes still burning with rage. He drifted from town to town, working odd jobs, more often found in taverns than at labor. Witnesses described him as a man consumed by bitterness, telling anyone who would listen that his wife had doomed him. "She lit the fire in me," he told a barkeep in Albany. "She lit it, and it never went out." His end came, not quietly, but in violence, as so much of his life had been. In 1846, during a tavern brawl in Syracuse, Patrick was stabbed in the chest. Witnesses recalled his last words before he collapsed. "It was her. Always her." According to official records, he died within minutes, his body unclaimed for days before the county arranged a pauper's burial. Thus, Patrick Sullivan's life closed in blood and bitterness, His grave is unmarked as the truth of the fire he never ceased to curse. His story, paired with Mary's in the Asylum, cemented the Sullivans as figures of horror in the county's memory, two paths diverging but forever chained to the same night of flames. And in the whispers that lingered, Patrick's voice was still heard, hoarse and damning. A man who carried the fire with him until it finally consumed him. Folklore and Fear. The deaths of Patrick and Mary Sullivan did not close the book on their story. If anything, their absence from the living seemed only to give the legend more room to grow. By the late 1840s, the tale of America's worst couple had already entered the realm of folklore, carried on the tongues of travelers, preachers, and children whispering by firelight. According to official records, the Sullivans' names appear only in ledgers of arrest, confinement, and death. But in the memory of the county, they lived on as specters, figures invoked to frighten children and explain misfortunes that no one could otherwise name. The ruins of their cabin became a sight of dread. Long after the fire, hunters swore they saw flames flicker among the blackened stones, though no would remain to burn. Travelers claimed to hear the cries of children at dusk, faint and far off, echoing across the fields. One farmhand told of passing the site on a stormy night and seeing a woman's figure in the window, though the cabin itself had long collapsed. According to local lore, to walk too close was to risk being followed home by whispers in the dark. Stories of the missing child deepened to fear. Some claimed he wandered the woods still, a pale figure glimpsed between trees, clutching a charred doll or dragging a broken toy. Others insisted he had grown into a feral man, half beast, haunting the riverbanks. Parents warned their children that the Sullivan boy would come for them if they strayed after dark. Whether ghost or fugitive, his presence lingered as the embodiment of the unanswered question at the heart of the tragedy. The Sullivans themselves became cautionary figures. Preachers thundered against the sins of drink and wrath, invoking Patrick's name as a warning. Wives spoke of Mary in hushed tones as both victim and villain, a woman who had let fury consume her soul. In taverns, men argued whether it was she or Patrick who had truly struck the match, their debates fueled by ale as much as by memory. Each retelling sharpened the story into a parable of vice, madness, and the dangers of unchecked rage. Superstition wrapped the tale in darker cloth. Farmers spoke of cattle refusing to graze near the ruins, of tools breaking inexplicably when brought onto the land. Children swore they saw faces in the smoke of their hearth fires, pale and twisted. A local deacon warned that the Sullivans had invited the devil into their home, and that he had never truly left. According to official records, none of these claims were ever investigated, but they persisted in sermons, in gossip, and in the long winters when stories were the only warmth against the cold. By the time a new generation had grown, the Sullivans were less remembered as people and more as myth. The worst couple in America, they were called, a name that traveled further than the county itself. Newspapers in other states occasionally revived the tale, blending fact with fiction until truth itself seemed another casualty of the fire. Yet in every telling, one theme remained constant: that some unions are born not of love, but of ruin, and that such ruin can outlive the flesh. Folklore has a way of keeping wounds open. In the case of the Sullivans, it ensured that the ashes of 1834 never cooled. Their names became shorthand for violence, their story a vessel for every parent's warning and every preacher's sermon. And in the silence of the countryside, where the ruins still smoldered in memory, if not in fact, people swore that the Sullivans remained, not as husband and wife, but as shadows bound forever by the fire they unleashed. Lost records and strange parallels. The search for truth in the Sullivan case was hindered not only by the contradictions of testimony, but by the loss of records themselves. In 1870, The Clay County Courthouse suffered a devastating fire that consumed shelves of documents, trial transcripts, depositions, and evidence logs among them. According to official records, the blaze was accidental, sparked by a tipped lantern. But for those who knew the story of the Sullivans, it felt like a grim echo. Once again, fire erased their history, leaving only fragments behind. Historians who later sought to reconstruct the case found themselves working with ashes. Newspaper clippings offered sensational headlines, but little consistency. Church records mentioned the baptisms of children, but failed to clarify names. Census entries contradicted each other, some listing 3 minors, others only 2. Letters and diaries from townsfolk spoke in riddles, heavy with rumor, but light on verifiable fact. It was as though the truth itself recoiled from preservation, refusing to be pinned to paper. Such absences bred theories. Some suggested that powerful men in the county, eager to protect their reputations, ensured the records were destroyed. Others whispered that the missing child had been taken in by relatives of influence, and that any trace of his existence had been deliberately erased. According to skeptics, the Sullivan tragedy was exaggerated by time and gossip, its horrors embroidered until fact and fiction blurred. Yet believers countered that too many independent accounts aligned for the story to be dismissed entirely. Parallels began to be drawn with other tragedies in American history. Folklorists compared the Sullivans to cases of so-called cursed families, whose members seemed bound to destruction by forces unseen. Psychologists of the early 20th century, looking back, described the couple as an example of shared psychosis, 2 unstable individuals whose violence fed upon itself until it consumed all around them. Paranormal enthusiasts offered another explanation, that the fire which followed them, from cabin to courthouse, was less coincidence than curse. In one particularly chilling comparison, writers noted the resemblance to the case of the Bell Witch of Tennessee, where a family was tormented by unexplained voices, visions, and violent outbursts. Like the Sullivans, the Bells were torn between accusations of madness and whispers of the supernatural. When fire speaks twice, one folklorist wrote, we must ask if it is accident or omen. Even in academic circles, the Sullivan tragedy proved difficult to categorize. It was part true crime, part folklore, part psychological case study. Students of law cited it as an example of justice undermined by lost evidence. Historians pointed to it as proof of how fragile records were in a young republic. And storytellers embraced it as a cautionary tale, a Gothic narrative fit for firesides and pulpits alike. Coda, America's Worst Couple. The story of Patrick and Mary Sullivan does not end neatly, for nothing in their lives or deaths ever did. By the close of the 19th century, the ruins of their home had vanished into the earth, and their names were spoken less often. Yet the tragedy they left behind lingered like smoke that refuses to clear. It had become less a tale of 2 people and more a symbol of something darker in the American character. The ruin that can emerge when violence and madness bind themselves together. According to official records, the Sullivans were little more than statistics: an inmate buried in a pauper's grave, a woman dead in an asylum, children reduced to lines in a coroner's ledger. But the records do not capture the fear they inspired, nor the way their story endured in whispers. To the community, they were remembered not for their lives, but for the fire that consumed them, a fire that seemed to echo in courthouse blazes and in tales of restless spirits seen by the ruins. Folklore transformed them into archetypes. Patrick became the brute undone by drink, Mary the mad woman consumed by visions, and together they were remembered as America's worst couple. The title was not formal, but it carried weight, passed from pulpits to parlors as a warning. Some invoked them as proof of the dangers of sin, others as evidence of curses that clung to families. In both cases, their humanity was stripped away, leaving only symbols of ruin. Yet in the silences of history, questions remain. Who truly struck the match? Did the missing child perish in the flames, or vanish into some darker fate? Were the lost records of the trial a mere accident, or another fire determined to erase the truth? Each gap in the story invites speculation, and each speculation ensures the Sullivans remain alive in memory. Perhaps that is why their tale endures, not because it was solved, but because it was not. Darker still are the whispers that the Sullivans were not merely victims of circumstance or cruelty, but something else see in omen, a union cursed from the start. Some said they had invited evil into their home, and that evil had answered in fire. Others believed they were proof of what happens when rage becomes the only language a couple knows. Either way, their tragedy stands as a mirror. In their story, we see the extremes of what love corrupted can become. In the end, the Sullivan family tragedy is not only a tale of 1834. It is a reminder that history is as fragile as the paper it is written on, that truth can vanish as easily as smoke, and that sometimes the darkest stories are those that refuse to be buried. Some believe the truth was buried in the ashes. Others believe the fire never went out. And so the Sullivans endure, bound together by destruction, their names etched forever into the shadowed ledger of America's past. Thus closes the story of America's worst couple. Yet even now, in the silence of winter nights, when the wind howls across the fields of New York, some swear they hear the echoes of children's cries and see a glow upon the horizon where no house stands. Whether fact or folklore, the Sullivans remain a tragedy without resolution, a wound that history has never healed. According to official records, all that remains today are scattered references: fines for Patrick's drunkenness, Mary's admittance to the asylum, the death certificates of 2 children. Everything else is smoke. And yet, in that absence, the story only grew stronger. The less that could be proven, the more room there was for fear, for invention, for belief. Fire had destroyed the paper, but it had not destroyed the legend. If anything, it had ensured that the truth, whatever it may have been, was buried forever beneath ash